Well, the most anticipated interview in horse racing in South Africa this year, and certainly probably be for the whole year. We're chatting to Adrian Todd, who's the managing director of the SAEPH, which is South African Equine Health and Protocols. Is that right, Adrian? Did I get it right?
No, you got it wrong, so I think you should start again.
South African Equine
Health and Protocol.
Health and Protocol. Well, it's close. Not
true.
bad. Adrian, fantastic of you to come out and join us here. And obviously, on everyone's lips is where we're going to go. So we'll get to that. But let's start at the beginning and start with how Adrian Todd evolved into a horseman. You came from a horse background or a farming background?
Yeah, no, James, that's correct. I came from a farming background in Australia. Just always been around horses. And I sort of got into racing a bit later and ended up in the US working with some really good horses. I was actually in the stallion barn for quite some time at Lane's End with the likes of AP Indy, King Mambo, Lemon Drop Kid. And then just one thing happened and another. I started dealing with exchange programs to let young people come into the United States to get experience. And I was fortunate enough to travel around with the Keeneland Association internationally during that time. And we added wineries to it, and I just started doing more and more stuff in South Africa. And one day I realized I'd ended up being here permanently.
Just chatting about Keeneland, because I think it's fascinating what they did, their long-term program, as to how they incorporated the young blood in horse racing. And it seems like there's a lesson there.
No, there's definitely some long-term vision there. You know, one of the things at that stage, they did seminars all over the world. And they always took US experts to share knowledge, etc. And they took me along. My role was to try to encourage the sons and daughters of the influential people in industry to come and do work experience in America. And the idea from Keeneland was there that, and the Kentucky Thoroughbred Association, of course, in 20, 25 years' time, when those young people had moved into positions of influence in their own country, they'd be more inclined to do business with their friends within the network they'd formed in America in their 12, 18 months there. And it's actually seems to be paying off from what I've heard.
It's worked? You've kept in touch with a lot of these people?
Yeah, no, it has. And the other thing it gave me was very fortunate in getting a good network around the world.
Well, no one can do without a good network, especially if you're trying to run South African protocols. That's not going to be the easiest thing around. Okay, so you ended up in South Africa as an Australian. That's never easy, you know. And CTS bagged you.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I was doing the exchange stuff, doing training, and then CTS came along, and I think everybody knows from there.
Well, they don't actually know from there, because the point is that you ran CTS for a number of years, and then last year, I think you made the announcement that you guys were doing the protocol and going to set up a business to run the protocols.
That's true, James. I think to explain what happened there, in 2015, there was a joint workshop held, and I say joint between Bloodstock South Africa and CTS. And the goal of that was to try to find a united way forward for the protocol drive. The outcome of that was a task team. And I believe there was quite a lot of success achieved with a task team in place. And then mid-2017, I think it was becoming obvious that we needed to add a political drive and have more of a focused effort in order to achieve the protocol goals. And SAEHP was set up as a non-profit entity. It was set up by Chris van Niekerk, Mike de Kock, and myself as the three founding directors. We successfully separated a protocol drive from the research, so those two are now totally separate efforts. And then Chris has now stepped back from the board of SAEHP. The board's expanded. Brian Finch is the chairman. Mike and I are still there, obviously. Mick Goss is there. Lee Scribanti and Mark Green from the TBA are there. And John Brewer, our research and implementation vet.
All right, let's go back to the beginning. And why are we in this position? 1997 seemed to be the the year of the watershed as far as protocols were concerned?
Well, I think, that's a very, very good way of putting it, and a very important thing that we address, because I've often felt that the story's not out there. People don't understand where we came from to where we are and to where we're going. And you're right, 1997 was a watershed event. A protocol was put in place. In those days, there was more of a focus within our government ranks on equine exports, and what was a very cutting-edge protocol for its time was implemented. Unfortunately, between the implementation of that protocol and 2011, we were closed down 50% of the time. And that was due to cases of horse sickness within the controlled zones, within the surveillance zone.
Closed down, meaning we couldn't send horses anywhere.
Correct.
We were on
Every
time.
time there was a case in the surveillance zone, we were banned for 2 years. And that led to it being roughly 50% of the time between 97 and 2011. And it's from 2011 to now where the story actually gets very interesting. There was a 2011 outbreak, 2-year ban. In 2013, when that 2-year ban was up, for the first time, the EU decided to come to South Africa and conduct a proper audit. Previous audits had generally been tacked onto something else, and they'd last a day and a half, 2 days tops. Sometimes it was just a desktop audit. There'd never been a proper investigation. And in 2013, when the 2-year ban was up, they did a proper full-on audit. And that for South Africa was a disaster. There were a number of points that we failed on, but if I pick on the main ones, you've got the capacity and the competence of our Central Veterinary Authority, the power to actually enforce any of the legislation, the capacity and the coordination of our laboratories, our surveillance program to be able to understand the movement of the disease, and that's coupled with movement control, and a contingency plan, or lack thereof, in case there was an outbreak of the disease. So those are the things that were found by the EU in 2013 to be our failings. It ended up being a moot point because there was another instance of African horse sickness in 2013 in the surveillance zone. Before we could even think any further, 2014, a major outbreak, that led to another 2-year ban. Now it starts to get very interesting. So from 14 to 16, that ban should have been up in 16. In 2015, one of the real watershed discoveries occurred. It was discovered that all of those previous outbreaks within the controlled zones were caused by live vaccine. Live vaccine injected into a horse, the midge spreading that to the next horse. So the solution was thought of pretty quickly. Let's change the legal vaccination times so that you can only vaccinate at the low risk season. And that was put out in 2015. However, unfortunately, that message wasn't distributed quickly enough. There wasn't enough time for the Unisterport biological products to change their manufacturing dates to have the vaccine ready for winter instead of when people had usually done it. It just didn't filter down. And with the lack of the message getting out there, people still vaccinated under the old way, and that led to the 2016 outbreak. After that, there was a massive awareness campaign to make people aware of the new vaccination regulations and the whys. The other thing that happened there is industry really started to focus with the advent of the Equine Health Fund in 2014 on a way forward.
Okay. So what in effect happened was that we were actually infecting our horses ourselves by vaccinating them, and the Colocoides was carrying it onto another horse. And in the surveillance zone, is that what it's called?
Yes.
The surveillance zone is the buffer area between
The free zone and the protection zone.
Correct. Is the surveillance zone not one of the big problems?
No, and let me carry on from there.
Okay.
You see, in 2014, 2015, that's when things started to get implemented. You must remember, prior to that, the zones were there, but there was no control, no management, effectively, of the zones. Government didn't have the resources. Horses were not a priority. A lot of good research was going on, but there was not really much implementation. 2016 started to get implemented. That's when we realised in 2017 the need for a focused drive on this. The surveillance zone, or the zone system in general, you can make some pretty solid arguments that it is a difficult system to deal with, but the zonal concept is so entrenched in EU legislation and thinking. We hope in the future to make some changes to it, but you're not going to get rid of it. And at the end of the day, we have to comply with regulations that make them feel comfortable. And with the advent of SAEHP and the separation, James, of protocol drive and research, we've made huge strides. Those points that I read out before, the capacity of our central authority, the legislative power, capacity of the labs, surveillance and contingency planning in case of an outbreak, I can sit here and I can comfortably say now, we've achieved those goals. We had hoped that in 2018, in June, when our ban was up, that just like 2013, so based on historical precedent, the EU would come and audit us straight away. That didn't happen. And notice I don't say unfortunately didn't happen, because we realised that we still weren't ready. Then, a couple of months later, there were some curveball questions thrown at us about zebras in the control zone. We partnered with the University of Edinburgh, and they did a biological modelling study to prove that the numbers of zebras within the Cape do not constitute a risk. So you've had, from 2011, there was never an opportunity where South Africa ever could have started trading again. Because before we could get ready to trade, boom, there'd be another case, extra 2 years. And even if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't have passed an audit. So now, for the first time ever, I believe, and I'm totally confident, that we're in a position where we can pass an audit.
Okay, well, we're going to need to pass the audit, and we're going to need to, unfortunately, take a break. But it just seems like the key point that you've told me is that in the period that you guys have taken over, you've separated the protocols from the scientists who are building vaccines and whatever. And that seems to be the major, major point as far as we're concerned.
No, I agree, James. I think it's an important division. Both are very necessary, but they need to operate in parallel.
Okay, we'll be back with Adrian after you watch this race, and we'll find out exactly what the way forward is from here. Right, well, we hope you've enjoyed that little break and made your cup of tea and back to winner. But more importantly, we need to know now what happens from here. Because, Adrian, we've been all sitting on tenterhooks for months and months, even years now, waiting to be able to export our horses. It doesn't happen. Everyone says, why is it not happening? What are you guys doing? You chaps don't know what you're doing. Basically, that's what everyone said. You tell us why you do know what you're doing, because I know that you know what you're doing and you've got a plan and you've got a goal, and the audit is obviously base one, and we've got to get past that.
I'd agree, James. If I was sitting there from the outside looking in, I'd also be wondering, why is this taking so long? And I hope we managed to explain with the timelines from the history that it would have been impossible at any point before September 2018 for South Africa to get back exporting. It just wouldn't have happened. Now, the stage we're at now, we need the audit. When we first started SAEHP, we had numerous meetings at ministerial level. A Deputy Director General within the Department of Agriculture was assigned to work with us. I have to go on record to say that since then, the Department of Agriculture has been nothing but wonderful in working hand in hand with us in a true public-private partnership to get to the point where we're ready for an audit. What we need now from government is a final political push to get the EU to come here, to get them to reinstate our direct trade. Government feel confident now as well that we will pass. If we don't, we're in serious trouble. South Africa must export. No matter what we think about everything that happened, either rightly or wrongly, with our export drive going back years into the past, we have to focus on where we are now, we're ready, and where we need to go to.
Okay, so let's say we pass the audit and we're able to now export our stock. There are countries out there that are very keen to get involved with us. I know that Hong Kong guys, Singapore guys, very keen for us, for our product. And there are many other markets as well that we can talk about. Turkey, Vietnam, lots of racing areas people don't even think about, that our product would do them very much better than what they're getting at the moment. Are you in a position to believe that we might be able to get to that?
100%, James. I totally agree. You know, we have a great product. The price point of our product is very good. We're already starting to look at distribution channels because we don't want to be in a position where we can trade, but hang on, we can't really because the logistics aren't in place. And we've constantly been updating foreign governments outside of the EU as well. You must remember the EU is considered a gold standard. When I first got involved in this, I, like everybody else, thought, the EU, it's frustrating to deal with them, but I learned very quickly that they have a gold standard. The world looks to the EU. What do the EU say? What's your arrangements with the EU? We've updated Hong Kong, we've updated Singapore. We've got a protocol in place with Hong Kong. It's just under temporary suspension. The minute we start trading with the EU, other countries will come online.
What does that mean as far as time is concerned? Let's talk about 14 days in a lockdown facility. Is that realistic? Are we going to get that?
It's totally realistic. There had to be 3 things achieved. The first was raising the comfort level and creating the competence or the view of competence from foreign governments in our country. Check. That's been achieved. The second part, aside from upskilling and upgrading all of our risk mitigation measures, we started engaging with the EU about the changes in the OIE, the World Animal Health Organization's legislation. That included the 14 days. Even though we're not open for trading, another massive achievement has been that the 14 days from a lockdown facility has now been included in the EU protocol. We don't yet have that facility, and once we're back trading, then that must be looked at by businesses, industry as a whole, as a business case as to whether it's viable to build that facility. But yes, it is possible.
Okay, well that brings me to the obvious question. Who's funding all this lot? Are we going to be able to get funding? Because it seems like things are going to happen quite quickly if we pass the audit.
If we pass an audit, James, the next thing that'll happen is you'll have a report lodged to the EU Veterinary Commission. And we've also, the last part of the 3 things we had to do, comfort levels raised with foreign government, upskill. We then had to make sure foreign industry was happy, because the last thing we want is for concerned foreign industry within the EU to lobby against us even if we pass an audit. We believe we've also checked that box. So therefore, once an audit's conducted, They usually do it much quicker, but it could take 6 to 8 weeks for a report to be finalised. We don't believe that we would have much to comment on after that because we are confident we've got now ducks in a row. That would then go before the EU Veterinary Commission that meet monthly, and we should then be back online.
Okay, let's you talk about protocols. That's your form of expertise on what you guys are working on. But now running parallel with that is vaccines, and obviously the scientists and what they do. Talking about a dead vaccine, is that possible? Because that might help a lot of our problems, mightn't it?
It would, James. You know, I have tried to keep abreast of the developments there. And I know that they've made great advances with the recombinant vaccine. And I also know that the OIE has published a report that will be implemented, the findings of that and the recommendations very shortly, to also pursue the development of inactivated or dead vaccine. There are some concerns in South Africa as to whether a dead vaccine will be workable enough in a totally endemic area, or whether it would only be used within the controlled zones. But that's not really my area of expertise, but I do know for a fact there's been advancement there, and the world is starting to take an interest in assisting South Africa in solving a vaccine issue.
Okay, Adrian, let's talk about how important this industry is to South Africa as a community, as a trade, and what horse racing means to South Africa, because I think it produces a huge amount of jobs. And if this doesn't work, there could be serious repercussions.
James, we know from the studies that have been done that 177,000 people are reliant and dependent upon people who work in the horse industry. We further know that the horse industry contributes over 2 billion rand a year to the GDP. We also know that we're in a stage of decline. Breeders are declining. That's going to have a knock-on effect to field sizes declining. And then can we meet our racing requirements, let alone export? So export's in a position where it's vital for our country. If we don't get it right this time, I think we can safely say that we can forget about it for a generation. Government's been wonderful. There's been a lot of assistance from industry, moral, financial, but we need now to push this across the line. We'll be taking an economic impact paper to government very shortly in order to get them totally on board with this final political push to get the EU here. Without it, we are in serious trouble in our racing industry.
Okay, how much do we actually export for at the moment, and what are the projections? Because you'd think that we'd actually end up turning this whole industry around if we're able to get it done properly or easily.
You've got to look one step further than just the racing industry.
Yes.
And it's been estimated that the rest of the equine industry support over another 100,000 people. So now we're over 250,000 people. We also know that current exports of all horses account for probably 250 million rand a year.
Is that all?
That's all. That's nothing.
It's nothing. It's
So
drop in the ocean.
I think it's totally viable. And don't just look at racing here. Look at all horses. Look at the numbers of Arab endurance horses that could be exported, our show jumpers, etc., etc. We believe it's totally possible, and these numbers have been spoken about for years, that you could, within 4 to 5 years, easily raise the export to $1 billion to $1.5 billion rand per annum. And with that would come all the accompanying job creation, which is in rural areas where, as we all know, job creation is the most needed.
You'd find stud farms would blossom, and that's the beginning, isn't it? You need stud farms to be producing a lot of stock. the figures that the Jockey Club have put out show that things are way down.
Yes.
And getting worse every year.
You know, I think everybody knows that every year there's less and less breeders around. There's less imports. People aren't restocking, importing mares, things like that. Our mare sales are down. They've never been great. That's always a good sign of a healthy industry when you've got a strong mare trade. If we don't get our exports right, just to reiterate it if I haven't done it enough, we're in serious trouble. And I know a lot of people are frustrated over the past and how long it took to get here. But I hope that the story helps explain from 2011 to 2018. And we came in here at the end of 17. And all that time prior, for right or for wrong, it would have been impossible to export. But now is our final and our only chance.
It sounds like you've got the right people in government. It sounds like you've got all your ducks in a row, which is absolutely amazing. Amazing news as far as I'm concerned and the whole industry is be concerned. How do you see it, honestly, as the next year or so?
I hope that we've achieved this. I'm confident we'll achieve this long before a year. I'm shooting at trying to get this all sorted out by June. What we need now is, as I alluded to before, we're going back to government with an assessment of the economic impact, both the good and the bad, if we get it right or if it doesn't happen, to ask for that powerful political assistance in getting the EU here. What's needed from industry is a united stance, moral support, financial support, because without these things, we are not going to achieve the goals. For the first time, we're on the brink. It's do it or not do it right now.
Yeah, the thought of failure is too abhorrent to believe. So, Adrian, all I can say is thank you so much for making the time available, coming all the way to KwaZulu-Natal to talk to us. We've been talking about this for a long time to try and get the show out there and get people to understand what's going on. It's amazing. And I can't commend you and your team enough on what you've done. I've always been one of those guys that said, you can never get it done. I'm now feeling positive. And hopefully, this is the start of a new dawn.
I certainly hope so. I believe our board, we've agreed on a strategy going forward to involve government more, to push for this audit at the political level. We've achieved what we needed to in upskilling. We need now total support from the industry, and we will get this across the line.
Well, we as the industry have got to give this total support. You guys have heard exactly what the story is now as far as the protocols are concerned, as far as where we are, and as far as what we need to do. The answer is absolutely simple. Support each other, support the industry that we love, and do your best to make a meaningful contribution. That way, we will end up resurrecting racing in South Africa right out of the ashes. I hope that it's been a good program, and I hope that you're able to act in the way that you need to act as a racing person in South Africa. And we look forward to the fruits of what we're going to bear in the next couple of years to come. From me, James Goodman, the whole Winning Ways team, and thank you to Adrian Todd and the whole lot that are involved in this whole export push. Let's go forward and enjoy your week's racing.